Ex-wife discovers a life-changing secret about ex-husband. Can they rebuild what was lost? Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main characters. Emily had been living her life in a quiet routine, filled with work, friends, and occasional moments of self-reflection. But there was always a lingering shadow from her past, her ex-husband, David. Their marriage had ended 2 years ago, but the scars of their separation hadn't fully healed. They had both moved on, or at least, that's what Emily thought. Until one day, when she stumbled upon a letter David had written years ago, one that would change everything. The letter was old, hidden away in a drawer she had never dared open. At first, Emily thought it was just another piece of old paperwork, perhaps something that had slipped through the cracks during their divorce. But as she read the letter, she realized it wasn't just a letter, it was a confession. David had written about a secret, a life-changing event that he had never shared with her. A secret that, if known, could have altered the course of their lives. Emily couldn't believe what she was reading. The shock of discovering this hidden truth left her breathless. Why hadn't David told her about this? Was it too painful, too difficult to share? Or was it something he had kept buried out of fear of how she might react? As the words on the page sank in, Emily felt a whirlwind of emotions. Betrayal. Confusion. Sympathy. She couldn't help but wonder if this secret was the real reason their marriage had fallen apart. Or had she been blind to the signs all along? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that perhaps their separation wasn't as clear-cut as she had believed. Could this revelation be the key to understanding what went wrong? Emily knew one thing for sure, she couldn't ignore it. She had to confront David, to understand why he had kept this secret for so long. And so, she made a decision. She would meet him, face to face, and find out the truth. Would this discovery bring them closer together, or would it push them further apart? Only time would tell. Emily sat at her kitchen table, the letter still in her hands. Her mind was racing, and her heart was heavy. The weight of the words she had just read lingered, refusing to let her focus on anything else. It had been hours since she first uncovered the letter, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. The secrets that David had kept from her all these years were now laid out before her, and she felt a strange mix of anger, confusion, and pity. Why hadn't he told her? Why had he kept something so important hidden? The more she thought about it, the more questions flooded her mind. The letter had been written before their marriage ended, but it was clear that David had been dealing with something immense, something that perhaps, if she had known, could have changed everything. She wondered if their relationship might have turned out differently if he had opened up about it. Had she truly known David, or had she been living in a bubble, unaware of his inner turmoil? As the hours passed, Emily couldn't sit still. She found herself pacing around her apartment, trying to sort through her emotions. There was no way she could ignore this. She had to confront David. She had to hear it from him. She had to know why he had kept such a monumental secret from her, and whether it was something that could still affect their lives. The decision was made. She would reach out to him. She didn't know how he would react. Would he be defensive? Would he deny everything, claiming that it was in the past and no longer relevant? Or would he be willing to talk? The idea of meeting him again after all this time felt strange. It had been 2 years since their divorce, and during that time, she had kept a distance. Their conversations had been polite, formal, but never personal. There was always a wall between them, one that had been built slowly, brick by brick, after each disappointment. But this was different. This wasn't just a simple conversation about the past. This was something deeper, something that had the potential to change everything. Emily knew she had to act quickly. The letter had stirred something in her, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. She picked up her phone and hesitated for a moment before dialing his number. It had been so long since she'd heard his voice. When the phone rang, her nerves grew, and for a moment she almost hung up. But then he answered. "Hello?" His voice was calm, but there was a trace of uncertainty. "David," Emily said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "We need to talk." David's voice on the other end of the phone was familiar, but it felt distant, like a stranger's voice coming from someone she had once known so well. Emily's heart raced as she gathered her thoughts. She had called him to confront him, to find out why he had kept that secret hidden for so long, but now that the moment was here, she wasn't sure what to expect. There was a long pause before David spoke again. "What is it, Emily?" His voice was cautious, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity, maybe even concern. "I think we need to meet," Emily said, trying to sound calm, even though her emotions were all over the place. "There's something I found, something I need to understand." David's silence spoke volumes. She could hear him breathe, as though he was weighing the decision in his mind. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. "All right. I'll meet you." "When?" Emily's mind raced again. She had hoped for a different reaction, perhaps one filled with reassurance, or an explanation right away, but all she had received was the same guarded tone he had always had. It was as if he was trying to protect himself from whatever this was. "Tomorrow afternoon," she said, almost without thinking. "I'll come by your place." David agreed, and the conversation ended with a quick goodbye, but Emily was left feeling more unsettled than before. As the day wore on, she found herself replaying the conversation over and over in her mind, wondering what David was thinking. She wasn't sure if she should be relieved or worried. What if he denied everything? What if he dismissed it as a misunderstanding? But then again, what if he opened up and finally told her everything? That thought both scared and intrigued her. She had never imagined that something so simple as a letter could turn her life upside down again. It wasn't just about the secret David had been hiding. It was about everything they had built together and lost. It was about the cracks in their marriage that had been there long before their divorce, cracks that she had ignored, or worse, had failed to see. Now, as she prepared to meet him, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was her last chance to understand the man she had once loved so deeply. She had to know why he had kept that secret, and what it meant for her future. Was there a chance they could rebuild what was lost? Could they find a way to forgive and move forward, or was this secret just the final nail in the coffin of their past? The questions swirled in her mind as she prepared for tomorrow's meeting, unsure of what to expect but knowing she had no choice but to face it head-on. Emily arrived at David's apartment exactly on time. Her hands were clammy, and her heart raced in her chest as she stood in front of the door, hesitating for a moment. This meeting was inevitable, but it didn't make it any easier. She hadn't seen David in 2 years, and despite the businesslike tone of their phone call, she couldn't shake the feeling that things between them would never be the same again. She took a deep breath and knocked. It wasn't long before David opened the door. His face was more worn than she remembered, a few new lines marking the passage of time, but his eyes still held the same familiar warmth. He stepped aside, silently inviting her in. The apartment was quiet, neat, with an air of stillness that made it feel like no one really lived there. "Thanks for coming," David said, his voice carrying the weight of the years that had passed since their last real conversation. Emily nodded, her throat tightening. "We need to talk," she said, trying to sound confident. David gestured toward the couch, and they both sat down, the space between them feeling larger than it had ever been before. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Emily's eyes roamed around the room, trying to avoid his gaze. The silence hung heavy in the air, making her uncomfortable. Finally, David broke the silence. "What's this about, Emily?" His tone was soft but curious, as though he was afraid of the answer. Emily took a deep breath and pulled out the letter she had found. She placed it on the coffee table between them, her hands trembling slightly. "I found this," she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety building inside her. "And I need to know why you never told me about it." David looked down at the letter, his face shifting from curiosity to something more guarded. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Emily thought he might get up and walk away. But instead, he sighed and reached for the letter, his fingers brushing over the paper as if he hadn't seen it in years. He slowly unfolded it, and began reading, the lines of his face deepening with every word. Emily watched him closely, trying to gauge his reaction, but he remained silent. When he finished, he looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "I didn't want you to know," he said quietly. "I thought it would change everything." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she searched his eyes. "What was so important?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly torn between opening up and keeping the past buried. He hesitated before speaking again, his voice strained. "It was a mistake, Emily. A huge mistake. One that I couldn't undo." Emily leaned forward, feeling her emotions surge. "What kind of mistake, David? What could be so bad that you couldn't tell me?" David looked away, his gaze drifting toward the window. "I hurt someone. I hurt you. But I didn't know how to fix it." The words hung in the air, and Emily felt the weight of them settle in her chest. There was more to this than she had imagined, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to hear it. But she had come this far. She needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. David's words hung in the air, thick with tension. Emily could feel the weight of what he was saying, but the confusion inside her was growing. He had hurt someone. He had hurt her. But how? What had happened that was so terrible, so unforgivable, that he felt it had to be hidden for so long? She leaned forward, her heart beating faster as she tried to piece it all together. "David," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did you do? Please, just tell me." David's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, it seemed like he was lost in thought, as if trying to find the right words. His hand shook slightly as he placed the letter back on the table. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought I could handle it. I thought I could protect you from it, but I couldn't. And now everything is ruined." Emily's mind was racing, but she remained quiet, waiting for him to continue. She could see how torn he was, how much this was costing him to relive. But she needed to know. "David, please," she urged, her voice gentle but firm. "What is it? What did you do?" He looked up at her, his eyes filled with regret. "It's not something I'm proud of, Emily," he said, his voice full of shame. "I was involved in something I should never have been. There were decisions I made, things I got involved in, that I thought were harmless at the time, but they weren't. And when you found out about it, it tore us apart." Emily's stomach churned as she listened, trying to comprehend what he was saying. What had he done? What had been so serious that it could ruin their marriage? "David," she said, her voice trembling now, "you're not making any sense. What are you talking about?" He took a deep breath, as though bracing himself for what he was about to say. "I got involved with someone else," he said, his voice barely audible. "Someone who wasn't you. And it wasn't just an affair. It was more than that. I got emotionally attached, and I couldn't see it at the time. I couldn't see how much it was hurting you, how much it was tearing us apart." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected there had been someone else, but hearing it out loud was different. It hit her harder than she had imagined. "Why didn't you tell me, David?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why did you hide it from me? All this time?" David's face twisted with pain. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you would leave me. I thought it would be the end of us, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. So I kept it a secret. I kept it buried, hoping it would go away." Emily felt a coldness settle in her chest. The betrayal stung more than she had prepared for. But as the shock of his confession began to wear off, something else started to emerge. She didn't know what to feel: anger, sadness, relief? Was there any hope for forgiveness? Could she ever trust him again? "David, you should have told me," she said, her voice steady but with a quiet sadness that she couldn't hide. You should have been honest with me, even if it meant hurting me. Because now I don't know where we go from here. David's eyes searched Emily's face, looking for any sign of understanding, any hint that she might still be willing to forgive him. But all he saw was the quiet, lingering hurt in her eyes, a hurt that seemed too deep to heal. He felt a lump form in his throat as he tried to find the words to explain. I'm sorry, Emily, he said softly, his voice full of regret. I didn't mean to hurt you like this. I never wanted to lose you. Emily looked at him for a long moment, her thoughts swirling. She had come here for answers, but now that she had them, she wasn't sure where that left her. The pain was fresh, sharper than she had expected. But in some strange way, it was also a relief to know the truth, to finally hear David admit what she had feared for so long. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, before speaking again. I don't know what to say, David, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I knew you. I thought I knew everything about our life, about our marriage. But this is a betrayal I didn't see coming. David nodded, his face crumpling with guilt. I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even deserve it. But I needed you to know. I needed you to know the truth, even if it's too late. Emily's mind was racing. She had never imagined that their marriage, the love they had once shared, could have been shattered by something so deep, so painful. But now that she had heard David's confession, she wasn't sure what her next move should be. Could she ever trust him again? Could they rebuild what had been lost? Or was this the end of their story? David, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I don't know what's going to happen now. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, if I can ever look at you the same way. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. But I need time. I need to figure out if there's anything left for us, or if this is really the end. David reached out, his hand trembling as he placed it on hers. Take all the time you need, he said, his voice sincere. I'll be here, waiting for you, no matter how long it takes. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right, even if you never want to see me again. Emily pulled her hand away gently, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She wasn't sure if she could ever forgive him, but she knew that the road ahead would not be an easy one. She stood up, her legs feeling weak beneath her. I'll go now, she said quietly. I need to think. David nodded, his face a mixture of relief and sorrow. I understand, he said softly, watching her walk toward the door. Emily turned one last time before leaving, her heart torn. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she had taken the first step toward understanding what had gone wrong, and whether there was any chance for healing. As the door closed behind her, the silence in the room felt deafening. But Emily knew that the hardest part was yet to come. Emily spent the next few days in a haze, unable to focus on anything. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of David and the conversation they had. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, it was the silence, the unanswered questions that kept swirling in her head. What now? Was there any possibility of moving forward, of forgiving him and rebuilding what they had? She had given herself space to think, but the more time passed, the more unsure she became about what she wanted. It wasn't that she didn't still care about him. It was the trust that had been broken, the feeling that everything they had built together had been built on shaky ground. She hadn't expected to feel so lost. As the days went on, Emily found herself going through the motions of life, returning to work and meeting up with friends, but her mind was never fully present. She kept asking herself if it was possible to move past something so monumental. Could she forgive him for the mistake that had cost them their marriage, or was that part of their story simply over? One evening, she received a text from David. It was simple, just 2 words. Can we talk? She stared at the screen for several moments, feeling a mix of emotions, confusion, frustration, and perhaps a little hope. She had agreed to meet with him before, and she had left with more questions than answers. But now, with time having passed, she wasn't sure what she was expecting from another conversation. She hesitated before responding, her finger hovering over the keyboard. Finally, she typed back. Okay. Where? David suggested a quiet cafe downtown, a place they used to go to when they were married. It felt strange, as if they were returning to a time that no longer existed. When Emily arrived, David was already sitting at a corner table. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment their eyes met, but neither of them spoke. The weight of everything that had happened hung between them, and it was clear that this was no ordinary conversation. David stood up as she approached, his face softening with a mixture of relief and guilt. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Emily simply nodded, not sure how to respond. They sat down, the silence lingering in the air as they both struggled to find the right words. David broke it first. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, his voice low. "About what you said, about how I betrayed your trust." Emily didn't say anything, but she looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "I can't undo what I did," David continued. "But I can try to make it right. I know I've hurt you, and I know that I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to ask you to try. I can't change the past, but maybe we can start over." Emily felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had spent so many days thinking about the possibility of forgiveness, but hearing him say the words now, it felt different. She had wanted to hear this, but at the same time, she wasn't sure if she was ready to let go of the hurt, the disappointment. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "David, I don't know," she said softly. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever see you the same way again." David's eyes were filled with sadness, but there was something else in them too, hope, as if he was still holding on to the possibility that they could find a way back to each other. "I understand," he said quietly. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And I'll wait as long as it takes for you to decide." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She wasn't ready to make a decision, but she knew that this was the beginning of something. Whether they could rebuild what was lost, only time would tell. As the days went by, Emily found herself in a state of constant inner turmoil. She had agreed to meet with David again, and now, with the weight of their last conversation still fresh in her mind, she couldn't escape the feeling of being stuck in limbo. David had apologized, pleaded for a chance to rebuild what they had lost, but could she truly move past the hurt? Could she look at him and see the man she once loved, or was that version of him forever lost to the betrayal? Emily had always prided herself on being strong, on not letting life's challenges break her, but this was different. She couldn't ignore the rawness of the pain, the trust that had been shattered. Every time she thought about David's confession, about the affair, about the emotional distance that had crept into their marriage, it felt like she was reopening a wound that hadn't fully healed. But at the same time, a small part of her wondered if there was a way forward. Maybe David was truly sorry. Maybe he could change. But could she forgive him? Could she let go of the past? These questions lingered in her mind unanswered. Emily spent hours thinking, reflecting on the relationship they had shared, the good times and the bad. She remembered their laughter, the long walks they used to take together, the simple joy of being with him. But she also remembered the growing distance, the times she had felt alone even when he was sitting right next to her. The cracks had been there for a long time, long before the affair, but the affair had brought everything to light. It had exposed the weaknesses in their relationship, the things they had ignored or brushed under the rug. Emily knew that forgiveness wasn't something that could happen overnight. It wasn't something she could rush into just because David was sorry. Forgiveness was a journey, one that she wasn't sure she was ready to start. But then again, maybe that was the only way forward. After all, holding on to anger and resentment wasn't going to help either of them move on. As she sat alone in her apartment one evening, her phone buzzed. It was a message from David. It was short and simple, just 2 words. "I'm here." He had suggested meeting again, this time at a park they had visited during their early days together. Emily felt a mixture of hesitation and curiosity. Was she ready to face him again? Was she ready to take the next step, whatever that might be? She didn't know. But she knew one thing. This conversation would determine whether or not there was any chance of rebuilding their relationship. She stood up, took a deep breath, and made her decision. She would go. When she arrived at the park, David was already waiting. He was sitting on a bench, looking out over the lake, his face etched with concern. As she approached, he stood up and turned to face her, his expression softening when their eyes met. "Emily," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." She nodded, unsure of what to say next. The silence between them was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, one that carried the weight of all the things they hadn't said yet. After a moment, Emily spoke. "David, I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can forget what happened." David's face fell, but he didn't interrupt. He simply listened, waiting for her to continue. "But I'm willing to try," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm willing to try if you are. I don't know where this will go, but I think we owe it to ourselves to find out." David's eyes filled with emotion as he nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Thank you," Emily whispered. She wasn't sure what the future held for them, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like they were both taking the first step toward healing. And that was enough, for now. Emily sat in the quiet park, the cool breeze brushing against her face, as she reflected on the path that had brought her here. The silence between her and David was no longer heavy, but filled with an unspoken understanding. They had both taken the first step toward healing, and though there was still uncertainty about where their journey would lead, it felt like a small but significant victory. David, sitting next to her on the bench, seemed lost in thought, his gaze focused on the still waters of the lake. The weight of their past was still there, lingering in the air, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Emily didn't feel overwhelmed by it. Instead, she felt a sense of possibility. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the memories of the past would resurface, when the hurt would creep back in, but Emily had learned to accept that healing wasn't a linear process. It would take time, and it wouldn't happen all at once. But as she looked at David, she saw someone who was willing to put in the work, someone who had acknowledged his mistakes and was committed to making things right. That, in itself, was something to hold on to. "Emily," David said softly, breaking the silence. She turned to face him, her heart still a little guarded but open to the possibility of something new. "I know we have a long way to go," he continued, his voice filled with sincerity. "But I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be by your side, every step of the way." Emily's heart swelled with emotion. She had heard these words before, but this time, they felt different. This time, there was no rush, no pressure. Just the promise of taking things one day at a time. She nodded slowly, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "I'm willing to try, David," she said, her words barely above a whisper. "But I need time. I need to heal. And I need you to understand that it won't be easy. There will be days when I feel angry, days when I feel like we're never going to get past this. But I want to try." David's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I understand," he said gently. "And I'll be patient. I know I don't deserve it, but I'll be here, no matter what." They sat there in silence for a few moments, the sound of birds chirping softly in the distance. The world around them seemed peaceful, as if nature itself was offering a quiet reassurance that, despite the storm they had weathered, there was still room for new beginnings. Emily knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She couldn't erase the past, and she didn't expect to. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like there was a way forward, a chance to rebuild, even if it meant taking small, uncertain steps. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Emily took a deep breath and smiled at David. "Let's take it one day at a time," she said softly. David nodded, his eyes filled with hope. And as they sat there, side by side, Emily realized that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance to rebuild what had been lost, one step at a time.